With Election Day right around the corner, voters will decide on key races happening in the tri-state. Joining us now to break down what New Yorkers need to know at the polls is Paul Ryan, Executive Director of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, there are 6 ballot measures New York City voters will need to decide on. Can you briefly talk about what voters need to know about them?
Well, I'll start by saying that NYC Votes will never tell you how to vote. We just want you to vote. And the first thing voters need to know is that they need to flip their ballots to find these 6 proposals. In 2022, for example, around 1 in 5 New Yorkers who voted for candidates didn't actually weigh in on the ballot measure. So first things first, don't forget to flip your ballot and vote to make your voices heard on these ballot measures. Now, the first proposal, Proposal 1, is known as the Equal Rights Amendment. It's a statewide ballot measure, and if passed, it would amend the state constitution to expand anti-discrimination protections and to enshrine reproductive rights. And amending the state constitution, it's a really big deal. It's difficult to do here in New York. In order for this measure to appear on the ballot this year, it had to have been passed by the New York State Legislature in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. So that's what's happened with respect to the Equal Rights Amendment. It's on the ballot. The other 5 proposals are all citywide ballot measures focused broadly on how our city is governed. So these are Props 2 through 6. These came out of a mayor's charter revision commission, which really assesses potential changes to the city charter. And the city charter is kind of like the city's version of the Constitution. So some members of the council have come out against these ballot measures, saying that the charter revision commission was rushed, that it didn't include enough input from New Yorkers, and that it would consolidate power with the mayor. Critics have also pointed out that some of the language makes it difficult to understand just what the implications of these 5 citywide ballot measures would be. But voters can find more information on all of these at nycvotes.org. They could also look for trustworthy news sources. They've done explainers on these citywide ballot measures. Local advocacy organizations are publishing their own positions on them. So that's the best way to get a sense of these 5 citywide ballot measures.
Would you say there's one out of the 5 that's the most contentious?
I would say the one that's getting the most attention is the statewide constitutional amendment charter or ballot proposal, which is, again, the Equal Rights Amendment. It would, if passed, it would amend the state constitution so New Yorkers would be protected from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy, and pregnancy outcomes. And it would enshrine in the state constitution the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision here for the state of New York. But voters really need to be on the lookout for mis and disinformation regarding this one, because there's a lot of it out there, unfortunately, and some things that Proposition 1 does not do. It does not alter any state laws currently on the books, including, for example, laws on who's eligible to vote or parents' oversight of their children. And there's some misinformation out there about those 2 points.
All right. And Paul, what are the other key issues that will drive New York City voters at the polls?
New Yorkers are concerned about any number of issues, but one thing I'd like to emphasize is that just because New York isn't in play as a presidential electoral college state doesn't mean that issues New Yorkers care about aren't on the ballot. And it's quite the opposite. National elections have a direct bearing on what happens in our city, for example, with things like infrastructure funding. So it's important that New Yorkers vote the entire ballot, from the presidential election to federal and state legislative office. And again, once more, flipping the ballot to see these 6 ballot measures and voting on them. But here in New York, we don't have a voter registration problem. We do have a voter turnout problem. And NYC Votes, we're focused on priority communities that are underserved by the electoral process. These communities include young voters under 30, voters with disabilities, voters who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, voters who primarily speak a language other than English, New American citizens, and New Yorkers in certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. So when we see a community with a lower participation average, we have to ask ourselves, what are the structural barriers that are preventing folks from casting their ballots? So my amazing NYC Votes colleagues, they're out in communities building strong relationships. They're listening to what all of these communities have to say, and we're creating resources that target voters' specific needs. So you'll find us tabling at street festivals, other events, going door to door, presenting at community spaces like churches, in the languages spoken in these communities to make it easier for all New Yorkers to participate in the upcoming election. And it's really an honor to do this work.
Well, that's amazing. Paul Ryan, Executive Director of the New York City Campaign Finance Board, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.